vote that voted, the swing vote to vote to go in-house and the swing vote to go outside the state. I've made mistakes. So I just wanted to kind of come and, if you don't mind, give you a couple of thoughts as to at least what I think I learned through that process. And you guys are going to have to figure all that out too. But, you know, I remember Ms. Messenger, back when they were making some decisions, I sent them all an email and just said, you know, questions are, and on the millage, you know, questions are, you know, what do you need? You know, right now your student progress is 25th in the state, and you obviously want it to be better, but that's the highest it's ever been in recent memory. Your finances, I think you've got about an 8% fund reserve, so you've actually got some of the most solid finances of any school district in the state as well. Your morale, staff morale, seems to be pretty good. Your students seem to be doing well. So, you know, depends on how you measure success, but most people would say right now the school district of Manatee County is doing pretty good. Although there's always people that like to take shots, but I'm just saying on balance, this district is doing pretty good. That's a testament to the board. That's a testament to your leadership, your administrative leadership. And so the question is, you know, do you need a different superintendent? Well, in your case, you do, because Ms. Saunders has told you she's going to leave. You know, and so the question now becomes, how big of a search do you do? Do you feel like you need to do a national search? And I know you're going to receive some push to do that. And that may be the best way for you to go. In-house, again, you know, below Ms. Saunders, you've got Doug Wagner. Now, I didn't know Doug Wagner before I was on the board, but I can tell you that the 10 years I spent working with him, and the years since that I've seen him, he's been pretty awesome. I even talked to him one time back before I left the board about did he want to become superintendent, and his position was he needed to get more seasoning. He needed to learn more before he took that role. And I always took that as a good sign that somebody recognizes they've got weaknesses that they need to overcome before they take a position that's going to require them to have certain skill sets. So you're going to have to kind of look at that. And you may decide you want to go out. But I can tell you, when you are interviewing at the national level, everybody puts their best foot forward. And you generally don't find out whether you got a winner or a loser until you've lived with them for a while. And by then it's too late. And so, you know, just from what I've experienced, you know, one of the things that Andrea's going to talk you through with the search process, it's going to take you months. You can also look at the possibility is, do you have that candidate in-house? And you're going to have to make your own decisions about that. But, you know, you may look at it and say, do you want to give your in-house candidate a 2-year contract if Ms. Saunders thinks that it's the right person, and move forward with that for a while, get a feel for it. I can tell you at least one board member, sorry, Sheena.
All right, you just keep picking on me.
She was not a Ms. Saunders fan, and I think she is now. And it took a little bit of living with her to get to that point. So you've got hard decisions. There's going to be people saying do a national search, and there's nothing wrong with doing a national search, but take the time to get to know what you've got in-house. Find out if he's interested in taking that position. Find out if Dr. Saunders thinks he can handle that position, and give that full consideration, because I can tell you that my experience with him has been nothing short of stellar. And that doesn't mean he's right for you, but I'm a fan. And having made other decisions that I really regretted, I realized that's a good choice to look at, even if you later on down the road decide, well, we tried it and it's not going the direction we want, we're going to make a different section. But I just want to throw in a plug that, you know, this big decision, look at what you need for the district, make sure that people that you interview have what you need, do your research on them, call the other board members at wherever they come from, try and get as much information as you can, and having done all that, you're still going to get surprises. You really will. I wish you the best of luck on that, and I'm available for you anytime. You guys are all the elected board members, and as I've always said, you know, you're in that seat. I support whoever's in that seat, so good luck to you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think I'm still in the meeting and not in the workshop. How do I get there from
Go back to your
Granicus?
Granicus, yeah, I've actually signed out of Granicus
Go to
too.
agenda.
You go back to the
Right.
Okay. On the top there, okay, school board.
Oh, yeah,
School board
and then
work-
join.
Okay. So then I wanted to raise my hand real quick.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. And I have to join, so,
Did you want to say something, or
yes.
were you trying to ask him a question?
No, I just.
Oh,
had-
go ahead, yeah.
So that was a public comment, is that correct, that we just heard here?
Yeah.
Which I noticed previous meetings that I'd seen, the little bell goes off and tells you that you're done at 3 minutes and then.
Yes, she just told me it right before he stopped. She told me that it was off and bell didn't go for some reason.
So that was my point, is that someone someday is gonna get upset about the fact that he probably had 5 minutes or something. And
That's fine.
On the other
I'll take the heat.
well, I'm not saying so much that. I mean, the other point I was gonna make on top of that is he's the kind of guy I would have liked to maybe heard more from or
Sure.
had a little bit of discussion with. And it's just an idea that, especially in these workshops, if we were in a little more informal setting, we might be able to add a little time to him or bring him in as a guest speaker, kind of like we have
Sure.
Miss Messina with us or something like
And
that.
I would definitely encourage you, if you don't have his contact, to get it and reach out. I know, me personally, I will reach out to him and love to sit down with him and pick his brain, because he's one that has been, like he said, he did it for a long time.
Yeah.
And so, but I do agree with you. I think that if the workshop settings, I don't know the best way to do it though, of like, hey, do we want someone like this? Let's give them 15 minutes. Do you know what I mean? Or 10 minutes rather than normal time. I don't know. But I do agree with you. I would like to, there are some workshops I would like to be able to have that more of a robust talk, but I don't know. I don't know what the right answer to that is.
I think if you're talking about public comment in a setting, you kind of have to follow your policy.
Right.
However, I think you can set up a different venue, and we're not calling it a workshop. It could be a town hall or something like that where you have different operating practices.
Right.
I think you probably get yourself in a little bit of scrutiny if it is a workshop and your policy says 3 minutes and you're going to arbitrarily say this one could get 5 or this one could get 8 or this one's 2 or
Right.
so. But if we deem that we need a setting like that, we just need to advertise it in a different protocol, and then you do have some different latitude to do it.
And I do think there's probably questions to him that you'll want to ask and know that I don't know if we did that in this setting. We didn't,
Right.
and we didn't publicize that that's what we're doing, having a Q&A with an old member. I don't know if that's sunshine.
So public comment is not a dialogue back and forth. They
Yeah.
get 3 minutes, they get to say, but I think we can, and it could be in part of this purview.
Yeah, have some
that we
kind
have
of-
like a town hall where it's set up differently, where
Yeah.
there is dialogue and feedback back and forth.
Agreed. And I think we just figure that out, what that is, because I agree with you.
So you're saying if we want to do a town hall setting, use this venue for public to come in and share their opinions?
They could, you could, and then you could respond to them, because as our policy
Okay.
and as it stands now in a workshop or a meeting, public comment is 3 minutes, they speak, and there's not a dialogue back and forth. You don't
In a
respond to
town
it.
hall setting, we could do that.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
that might be it.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
okay.
let me,
Just curious.
I was going to say one thing.
Yeah, I was going to agree with Superintendent. That was just a public comment. It wasn't a feature speaker or anything. So they should get treated the same as any other public comment, or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Just there was a IT issue and the alarm didn't go off or whatever. And as a former board member, we all know board members have trouble speaking in just 3-minute intervals, right? So but as far as researching, doing y'all's own research, you can contact whoever you want, and prior board members that have had to go through this process would be a good people to talk to. So that doesn't violate any sunshine law. So you can definitely do that.
Thank you.
Ms. Messenger was next.
I was just gonna say, we have done town halls at schools when there were specific topics and items that we wanted to discuss so I just wanted to say you don't even actually have to
We can
even have it
still
here.
ourselves.
Well, no, I mean, the district has done it, but,
Right.
they've been on different topics and things, and they've been at schools and stuff like that, so not necessarily even here, that's all.
Thank you.
Right, oh, I get you, yeah.
The other comment I had was, as I watched many hours of meetings, you know, when I was a candidate and stuff, getting ready for this job, one thing I noticed is that when we have these settings, there are no people kind of outside of the bubble, so to speak, that when we have workshops, you know, like if I know someone that's an expert in a field in something, I might say, hey, I'd really like to have Mr. Smith come and speak to us on this topic during the workshop because he is an expert in this area, this field, and we'd like to put him on the agenda for 15 minutes and then offer a 10-minute Q&A session or a 15-minute Q&A session. But it seems a lot of the workshops that I've watched, it seems like it's just kind of the bubble, and we discuss things inside the bubble and the people in the bubble, but there's no outside input. But a guy like that, like if we have a workshop on picking a superintendent, I'd like for him to come and give him 15 minutes and go through a PowerPoint presentation and then have questions and answers. That's just what I've noticed in workshops. It's kind of like in the bubble and we don't get a lot of outside input.
I think that if, as we go through and we do like workshop items and things are coming, you know, as not only as we all bring it up to the superintendent, but then once we see it and discuss it, I don't disagree with that. I think that if you see, hey, in March we're talking about landscaping, I'm just making something up, and the landscaping guy that you know is great, whatever, then I don't see a reason why we can't ask that. I mean, I don't know exactly the procedure. I don't know if Mr. Dye wants to. If we wanted it, we had a workshop and we're talking about something, we want to bring in an outside person. What are your thoughts on that? I mean,
We just have to be careful. An outside person that could be a vendor cannot come and
Correct.
present that you may give them a contract for landscaping. So I think it just depends on the topic. We have had outside people. When we had a big discussion on solar, we had FPL come and do the presentation. So it just depends on the topic. So we certainly can. It depends. It depends on the topic.
Right.
Some of the workshops are information relating to the district's working plan or outcomes of the plan. So that's why it's just district people. But if we are going down, and you will be for this conversation, we certainly can set up things in a different manner so that you have latitude of other people voicing their opinions, and it's not public comment, because then you're bound by your policy. So absolutely. And we can have them in high school auditoriums. We could have it at the Wakeland Center. It doesn't even have to be in this room. So we have other places that we could also have that type of a forum. And we have. Yeah, but you're right, not frequently, but we certainly can.
thank you. All right, Ms. Messina, floor is yours.
Thank you, and hello, board members. I'm here today at the request of your chair to talk to you about what all the things are involved when you do a superintendent search. As you may know, I'm Andrea Messina, the CEO of the Florida School Boards Association, and we work with all the districts in the state who have both elected and appointed superintendents. You probably know that regardless of whether they're elected or appointment, superintendent has the same authority. It's just the selection and how they get chosen to be the superintendent is what differs. And so I'm going to walk through with you. You have an appointed superintendent, all of the things that you're going to want to be thinking about for the next few weeks. You're going to have to get back together and kind of create a game plan for how you want to move forward now that your superintendent has indicated that she's going to be retiring. And so I'm going to be doing exactly what you described, which is I have a few PowerPoint points that I'd like to make, and I'll answer whatever questions that you might have. And we do this, as a service to you, our members. But the one thing I want to stress to you is that choosing the superintendent is the single most important decision you'll ever make as a school board member. Who you put as the leader of the district, the CEO of the district, determines everything that comes down from that. And so it's a very important decision that you should take very seriously and make sure that you have all your questions answered along the way. I will tell you that in Florida, as I mentioned before, we have both elected and appointed superintendents. We have 29 appointed superintendents in Florida. Of those 29, and I'm giving you this data so that you have a context of appointed superintendents in Florida. Of these 29, we have 18 of them are new superintendents since 2020. All right? So 18 out of 29 are only within 2 years having been appointed. And right now, I've just added the little stars, which we believe to be current or likely openings in 2023 due to retirement or separation. So you'll notice there are 6 yellow stars. We believe that within the next 6 months to 12 months, those 6 districts are going to be competing with you for a pool of candidates for the position of superintendent. The one thing I like to do is make sure school board members know that there is no Superman or Superwoman. They do not exist. That's what everybody wants. That's what your community wants. I want it too. But every candidate that you have is going to have some strengths and some areas where they're going to need to have their team members be the experts. So because of that, not all candidates are going to be apples to apples. You'll have some candidates that maybe are more curricular focused, and some candidates that are more financially focused, and some candidates that might be more community focused, depending on the history of their jobs throughout whatever industry they happen to be in. You may or may not require them to have education experience. That's going to be a board decision that you'll have to talk about. But regardless, to think that you're going to find the absolute perfect person with everything that you want, I just need to dispel that from the beginning. You're going to have to say, this is more valuable than this to me at this time. And then Gina may say that, and that may differ from what Cindy says. So then as a board, you'll have to collaborate and determine that as a board for the district, here's what we weigh right now. We might weigh it differently in 5 years, and we may have weighed it differently 5 years ago, but for right now, for this district, here's what this board's going to decide is the priority. So I just want to make sure you know that. Throughout your search, you can expect 3 things to be sort of woven in the fabric of everything that you do. The first is the Sunshine Law. Nothing that happens related to a superintendent search should be shielded from the Sunshine Law. Fair to say, Mr. Attorney? Secondly, public records. And the reason I bring these up right from the start is because in Florida, we have different public records and sunshine laws than many other states have. So there are sitting superintendents in other states who are used to a process that would shield them from public records and sunshine law until the time where a school board would say, these are our finalists. If they apply, their name would be hidden. That doesn't exist in Florida. So because of that, some out-of-state candidates are deterred from applying because they would have to, the moment they apply, or prior to, ideally, they would have to have a conversation with their sitting board that says, I'm applying down in Florida, in which case the relationship with the sitting board could be compromised. So my goal is to kind of help you understand the landscape in which you're going to be operating, and I want to be honest with you so you know what you're up against. The third thing that's going to be consistent throughout is public input, and the expectation is, just as you did this morning, every meeting that you have related to the superintendent search or every event that you have, there would be some involvement of the public, and you all will get to determine the extent of the true involvement, but no matter, you will always be having public input throughout, including up to and including the night you select your superintendent. I can promise you, after you've done interviews, you're going to have community members who feel strongly about one candidate or another or multiple candidates, and they will line up because they want you to know who they support. That very night, you'll get quite a bit of public input. But before the search, question?
Yeah, something that you said before.
Yes, ma'am.
There are the Sunshine Law, because we don't want to discourage someone from applying by having to go public. There is a search firm that wrote an article about that they go through the candidates and they present the finalists, and so therefore the board has no knowledge of who they were and no input. Is that permissible?
I'm not your attorney, so you're going to have to talk to your attorney. I'm going to say you will come across firms that will say that and will do that. I'm not sure it's been tried in court. not all firms do that. Some firms, right from the start, the minute somebody applies, that's public information. It gets posted on your website and everybody knows. So your attorney will have to be the one to guide you on that particular question. I've seen attorneys go both ways. This is why I'm saying this, and your attorney would have to weigh in on that. And I don't know if you want to do it right now, but okay.
There's a lot of facts to that I have to explore. It does sound problematic.
I don't recommend it, but I'm not that firm. But before the search, there are a number of things that you should be aware of and you need to kind of determine as a board. The first is typically you'll want to have some sort of consultancy team. There are a number of reasons for that, not the least of which is I want to remind you that when your superintendent comes in, that person is going to oversee your HR department and every other person in the district. So if you put those people in the position of being involved along the way, and then that person that gets hired, they end up having to report to, it can be a compromising situation. You want to leave your people above reproach. You want the process to be above reproach. And in order to do that, there should be an arm's length from your internal staff. I don't know, I heard Mr. Goss mention that there may or may not be some internal candidates. If you do have internal candidates, all the more reason you need some separation from your own staff to keep everything above reproach. Typically, you'll want to do sort of a review of where the district is, what you're looking for. There are times, and there was a time in this county when I think I heard Mr. Tatum even mention it, when the board had a bit of a deficit financially, in which case the focus for a superintendent was someone with strong financial acumen, right? There could be a time in a school district's history when they may be having some challenges with student achievement, in which case they may be going for an educational academic leader. So you want to kind of sit down and as a board agree where you are and what your priorities might be. But you also want to include your community. You want to know what the priorities of your community are, so that, I mean, these are the community's schools. And so you want to hear from your community, because you sitting here have access to information that the community doesn't. You may think that this is something that's the most important, but through listening to the community, you find out, well, there's these other pieces that we need to kind of shore up. So you're going to want some community input. You're going to need to determine what, if any, overlap you're going to have with a new person coming in and your retiring superintendent. Maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks, whatever that might be. You're going to want to, when you're thinking of your timeline, build in whatever that overlap is. And then you're going to want to develop your timeline. Now, we strongly recommend that when you post your timeline, you don't change the main events. So, for example, when you post your timeline, you post applications begin this day, close this day. You don't change the date, because then it appears that it's unfair and somebody's getting an unfair treatment and you've extended it for somebody for whatever reason. You also, when you post your timeline, want to post, here are the days that we're going to want to be interviewing people face to face, because you want the applicants to block that time off, because you, I hope, are going to be expecting highly accomplished and respected people in their fields. And so they're going to have busy calendars. And in order for them to be able to come to an interview face to face with you, they need to kind of plan things around that important date. And once you set that date, the expectation would be all the board members and the applicants, those are the dates we're holding, and that's when those interviews are going to take place. So that's some of the stuff you want to think about before the search. But there's a number of steps that you'll go through during a search. And I heard Mr. Gause mention it would take quite some time, and I'm going to kind of go into detail on all of these, but there's a lot of pieces along the way. If you're going to do a complete and thorough search, you may, as I heard Mr. Gause mention, and by the way, I've worked with all those same superintendents in this county since he was here. If the board has an internal candidate or a local candidate or any candidate, and the entire board decides, yep, this is the person we're going to get behind, and we want that person, and we know it all, and we all agree, you may not need to go through a search. Some districts find themselves in that position. I'm not saying you're there, but I'm saying if you are there, you should talk about it. Because if you've just gone through, for example, a strategic planning process, and if you have a leadership development system in your district, and everything's in place for somebody to succeed, the seated superintendent, and it makes sense, there's no reason to go through a bunch of transition. Just get that stuff going and keep moving. I'm not sure you're there. If you were, typically I wouldn't be here at this type of a workshop, but I do like to mention that in some districts that does exist. That happened in Charlotte County, which is 2 counties to the south. Their current superintendent, who recently also announced his retirement, when they hired him, he was a deputy superintendent. The other superintendent had said he was retiring. They were at a board meeting kind of talking, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And one of the board members said, well, the guy I want sitting right there. And I think we all know he's done what he needs to do, and he's ready and he's prepared. And they kind of agreed and said, well, how about at our next meeting we advertise that we'd like to hire him as our superintendent? And that's what they did. It was quick, it was easy, smooth transition. Rare, very, very rare. But as I said, there's a number of steps. So let me go through all those steps. When you determine your timeline, you have to kind of back into everything. So we know her last day because she has told you, is it June 30? All right, so there's June 30. So then you back up from that, you've got some sense of overlap. Back up from that, you may have graduations. Back up from that, you may have this, and that leads you to, here's when we advertise, here's when we interview, and you just kind of back into it all. Your consultants, whoever you choose to work with, they will help you with that, but that's the very first and most important thing, so that then the community knows what to expect and when to expect it. Secondly, you have to decide the scope of your search, and that's something that Mr. Goss also mentioned. One thing that I think people, years ago, boards would have to decide, do we want to do a statewide search, do we want to do a national search? But that was really before the internet was as open and ubiquitous as it is today. So I would tell you that it doesn't matter what search you do, it's going to be an international search. People from across the country will hear about your search because they have Google alerts on superintendent searches all over the country, and people even in other countries will hear about your search. So it would be a misnomer to think that we're just going to do a Florida search, because that's just not a practical reality in today's world. Word's going to get out there, and it will be a national search, whether you want it to be or not. But you get to decide where you want to advertise. You may decide you want to advertise in the New York Times, in the Los Angeles Times. You may decide where you want to advertise. That will help to determine part of the scope, or you may want to keep some more limited scope of advertisement. You'll all have to discuss that, when you get to that point along the way. Related to input, you'll have to decide the role that your staff members will play, students will play, the community, parents, business community. Everyone will have some role in an input format. You can have town hall meetings, as you discussed. You can do electronic surveys. You can have focus groups. You can have regional community input sessions. There's all sorts of formats you can consider. 1, 2, 3, all of them. It's up to you to decide how much and to what degree you're going to have input. But at some point, you have to kind of say, okay, on the front end, now we know what we need. We need to advertise. The input will help us make the decision. But the decision, no matter what, is yours to make. It's not the community's to make. It's not staff's to make. You cannot, statutorily, you cannot give that decision making to anyone. It is your decision to make. So we kind of recommend that you guard and protect your right to make the decision, and be careful how if you do have some sort of community, advisory group of some sort, that you really make sure they understand whatever that role is that you want them to have. It is not to determine who the superintendent is. That is the board's role. Speaking of community advisories, there are any number of models of community advisory groups. Districts, again, get to decide what, if any, role they want a community group to have. In some districts, a community advisory helps to determine what the community survey questions would include. In other districts, a community advisory would help review the applications when they come in and then bring to the board 10 or 12 that they think meet the requirements. That doesn't mean you don't see the others. It just means that that might be what they recommend. And others might have the community advisory participate in helping to create questions that you might ask during the search. It can be any number of things, but think about what role you want any community group. It doesn't have to be a formal group, but it can be, and if it is, there needs to be a defined scope. Once you've got all your input, then the board decides, all right, these are the qualifications we're going to have. And I mentioned before, you may or may not have educational background. Some districts are looking for what we would consider a non-traditional candidate. Other districts say it's really important that whoever sits in that seat has had experience being a school principal, being a district manager of some sort, having some district or other senior executive type position. You all get to decide what the qualifications are that are required as well as desired. So you may say master's degree required, doctorate preferred. You might just say master's required. You may say has to have been a principal, has to have been a teacher or principal, district level leader for 5 years. You might say 10 years. You'll get to decide that. But also when we talk about qualities, that's where it's going to be really unique to your district and your district's needs. You all, I think you have another referendum coming up in a few years at some point? 2024. So you may, one of your qualities and qualifications may be experience passing local referendums. It might be experience redistricting schools or working construction, oversight of building projects, or there may be some specific things unique to your community at this time that you would want in the qualifications. Typical qualifications for superintendents who are appointed would be high-level communications, speaking, writing, reading, communication with the community. You know, there's some that are very standard, but there may be a unique one or two, and if there is, you need to let people know right from the start. We are really looking for that right now, so that people who have that will know and hopefully be attracted to apply. You're also going to have to discuss a compensation package for your appointed superintendent. And I will tell you, and I spoke to your superintendent about this before we had this workshop, the compensation for superintendents today, looking for superintendents, is very different than what it might have been 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago. It is a different job market, and it's a challenging job market to attract people. Many people who under different circumstances would be applying and ready in their careers to take on the role of superintendent are not as willing to be superintendents today as they were 2-3 years ago. And so it's going to have to be, people are going to be weighing their career risk and the reward. And so the compensation package is something that, especially with 5 other districts looking right now, that's something that you're going to have some hard discussions about. And your community is going to have some hard discussions about it. Every district I know in Florida is in a fiscally conservative community. And paying a chief executive becomes a conversation that the community likes to have. I like to remind board members and community members that the CEO of your school district, technically and typically in most districts, runs the largest corporation, whatever that county happens to be. Now, you may not be the number one in this county. Okay, you are. And typically, people forget that the superintendent runs a transportation system with buses, a restaurant system with your food service, an inventory system with your equipment and supplies, and we haven't even started talking about instructional. So there's a lot that goes into the work of a superintendent, and it's going to be incumbent upon you all to help your community understand it's a tough market right now for superintendents. Vetting, yes, sir.
A raise your hand thing. Are we missing a raise your hand in workshops? Do we have the Granicus?
Yeah, we have it. I'm not sure. Can we do it on the Granicus? Yeah.
I don't see it. I'm sorry.
No worries, go.
Could you expand a little bit? You made a comment, I think I heard it correctly, something about the job market right now is such that people who normally might want to put in to be a superintendent won't want to do it or are not ready to do it. And I thought about that for about 5 seconds, and I thought, why not? I mean, if you're trying to reach the pinnacle of your career, it seems like being a school superintendent, if you're in school administration, that's the goal. There's nowhere to go much higher. Why is a job? Expound on that idea.
Sure. As you know, you just came off the campaign trail, there's a lot of contention out there and a lot of, here's what I will tell you. In school districts, there has been a lot of time in the last year and a half not focused on student academics. It's been on answering calls, not that they're not important, they are, but the focus on student achievement has had to kind of lessen so that there's all these other issues, social media posts that may not be factual, things like that. It has, there's a hope that some of that's going to die down, not because the issues aren't important, but that how they're managed are better handled in communities, the school district, as well as from the communities, both sides, through the school board, by the way. That's part of the school board's job. But right now, it's the length of meetings when school boards, that's not to say you don't talk about things, but when meetings become 13 hours and there's contention on the board, that's just not a desirable place where people want to spend a lot of their time. And if they are career educators, there's concern right now from the high level administrators that becoming a superintendent is a career ender very quickly because people are quick to make decisions and one bad decision, you're out. True or not, that's the perception. And so that's what people who ordinarily would have been ready to apply are saying, I'm going to wait 2 years. I'm going to see how things die down. I'm going to see how things play out, because they do care about their careers. They do care about education, and they want to make sure they're making the right decision and that they're not going to go somewhere for 1 year and then be left with their career in ruins. So people are very cautious right now to take a leap. It's almost like when there's chaos somewhere, or even in a school. You'll understand this now that you're on the school board. When there's change, regardless of good or bad, people tend to sort of hibernate and protect. The teachers just want to teach. Just let me teach these kids. I got however many kids in my classroom, how many hours. I want to go teach the kids, go home. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I'm not trying to get anybody in trouble. Just let me do my job. And it becomes kind of siloed at that time. This is a change. Change scares people. And education is undergoing a change. Many people believe, which is a good change, but it is a change. And so there's a lot of hesitancy. There's, when I was at my conference, you all were at the conference, talking to people who, I know we've got 6 superintendents coming up in the state, and I know people who I would think would be ready. And when I talk to them, what I hear from them is, I think I'm just going to wait for a while.
So it might be, because when I hear the word job market, I think number of available jobs, unemployment rate. But what I hear you saying, it's more what we might call a social, political climate. Mm-hmm. It's not conducive to putting yourself in a position that, even though it's an appointed position, is really to some degree a political. It's almost like it's a political appointee, is what it is. It can be hired and fired.
Yes.
Like as we're seeing down in Sarasota, and they don't. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
I would tell you that's what people are starting to express to me concerns about. But I will also tell you, let me think of what state it is. I was talking to Kansas, somebody in Kansas that works for the Kansas School Boards Association. And in Kansas, it's a little different than Florida because we have elected superintendents in Florida. Your superintendent technically doesn't have to have a superintendent certificate, right? Because we have electeds and you can't require it. But in Kansas, they do. And so they're not getting people applying that have those certificates. And so one superintendent over one county, because that person has that certificate in Kansas, is having to serve over 3, 4, 5 school districts just because they can't get anyone to apply. They cannot get people to apply to be superintendent.
Why don't they just change the law then? I mean, if it works in other states, why?
I'm not their legislature and I don't run their legislative platform. I'm just telling you this is what they're faced with right now. But in the same way that you have teacher more openings than you can fill, we're starting to have administrative openings that we can't fill, and the superintendent position is the most high profile of them.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to take that opportunity to say that an applicant is going to be checking us out and interviewing us and vetting us as much as we are going to be doing that for them. And so it's, right now, we look pretty good compared to some of these other districts. I mean, you know, but we've got to keep that up, and especially in our meetings, because they're going to be watching them, you know, we've got to be on our game.
I appreciate you saying that because it's very true. I will tell you right now, some people with whom I've spoken have already started watching board meetings. And they don't expect unanimous votes. They don't expect board members to be best friends. No one's asking for that. What they expect is that they'll treat each other respectfully, that they'll treat staff respectfully, and that if they have disagreement, they will work through it and go to the next item. That's all they're really looking for. And they will, I can promise you, they are watching the boards, as you mentioned, because they want to see those elements that I just described, how you interact with staff, if you do it in an accusatory and disrespectful manner. People, that's not an appealing place I want to come, because now I'm going to have to defend my people, and that doesn't, and I want to be really clear because we have some new school board members here, that doesn't mean you don't ask questions. It means when you ask questions, you do it in a respectful way. That's all. Because the questions are important. As you said, you're going to continue to ask hard questions. That's why people put you in that seat. But how we ask them will send a message on who's going to be willing to come here. And under these conditions that I'm describing today, there are other districts in the state of Florida that they could go to if they choose to. So they are going to be looking. That's true. And I also want to mention to you that by and large, the people who apply to be superintendent in Manatee County are going to be different than somebody who would apply to go to Broward County. You're a different size district. It's a whole different political climate here. So people who want to be superintendents look for some of those things as well, and Manatee is going to be a better fit for some people. When I talked about qualities and qualifications, one thing you may also look at as a quality or qualification is experience in a similar sized district. So people who haven't worked, or people who've only worked in very small districts with elected superintendents, for example, they may not see Manatee as the right choice for them. They certainly wouldn't see Broward as the right choice for them. So there is some of that helps to filter who applies. But I wouldn't expect the same people to apply for all 6 of the openings. But there are some, Brevard, which is similarly sized in a range to you. Charlotte's much smaller, but they're still a good-sized district and with high achievement and pretty stable finances. So those are the kinds of things that make a district appealing, and there are some that will be competitive with you right now. You're going to want to vet your candidates, and how you vet them is going to be typically your whoever you decide to hire as a consultant will have a normal pattern of vetting, but it will typically include some level of background check, some level of social media check, some level of reference checking, as well as checking on things that aren't official references that have been submitted. You kind of do your homework and research on people. But I will promise you, everyone that applies, you will get, and Bob and I were talking, things are different today than they were before because of social media and because of the way people can communicate with everyone. every single person who is a finalist or a semifinalist, and in some cases will even apply, you will start getting emails, copies of blog posts, things that people have said about them on social media, good and bad. Every candidate's going to have that. So you just have to understand that it's out there and it exists. Not all of it is going to be true, but you're going to have to weed through it. And I just want to prepare you, because somebody who's been done wrong in a school district, whether it was the candidate's fault or not, will do what they can to block a candidate just to keep them from ever having a livelihood. And so you just need to be aware the emails are going to start. And if you have internal candidates, more than one, camps are going to form. So how you behave as a board and how open-minded you are as a board is going to set the tone for how staff responds and how you respond to the community. Now, typically, the recommendation when you get emails, good or bad, is thank you for your input. That's a full sentence. So thank you for your input, and read it. You should read it. And there are some times when there's a context involved. As I mentioned, you'll have background checks, and one of the background checks that I would hope you would want to include would be checking to see if there are any lawsuits filed against the candidate. But I will also tell you, if you have somebody who's had any level of responsibility in a school district, there will be lawsuits with that person's name on it. If somebody's been a principal and any teacher at that school has done something and the parents are suing something about the teacher, the principal's going to get named, the superintendent's going to get named. So there will be lawsuits with people's names on it. You can't avoid that. There will be decisions that people who have high levels of responsibility have to make decisions that not everybody likes. So people will be disappointed with some decisions. You just need to kind of prepare for all of that to come in, because I promise you it will. It will be more than you'll ever have wanted to know about people, good and bad. But you just need to know that it's coming to sort of prepare yourself and think through how you're going to manage it and handle it, that sort of thing. Interviews. Typically, years ago, like when Bob probably even first started interviewing superintendents, the board might have actually traveled to the county where the candidate is coming from.
Full board?
They might have. That doesn't happen anymore. You can pick up the phone, you can Zoom with people, you find out so much about people that before you couldn't find out. So that's kind of a passé. That would not normally happen anymore. I've not heard of it in years. But when you do interviews, there's a number of different ways that you would want to do the interviews. There are ways that you can vet candidates. If you decide to have a pool of semifinalists, you can decide how you want to get through the semifinalist level to the finalist level. And then you will want public interviews with all of your finalist candidates. And typically it would be in a boardroom like this, and the candidate would be at a table, and the full board would meet with each of the applicants and have a very public interview that probably is live streamed and certainly available on demand. And then I cannot stress enough how important it is that you also do one-on-ones with each of the applicants. You may also decide that part of the interview process could be some sort of a community meet the candidate, meet and greet, whatever that might look like. And there's any number of iterations that could look like. And so community members can ask a question or two and provide feedback to you on what they think the candidate's strengths are, or things like that. But you're going to want to block off when you decide what days you have for interviews. Please, please, please make sure that everyone can be there for the whole time, because it's not fair to a candidate to do a face-to-face interview with one applicant and then have to do a video interview with somebody else. You really want that face-to-face, and there's no substitute for sitting one-on-one in an office to see how you're going to be able to work with that person. Can I work with this person? Does it seem like, do they look me in the eye? Do they not look me in the eye? You don't know that sometimes through a screen, and you kind of need the feel for that. This is a big decision. You're going to have to work with this person, so you want to get it right. There are costs involved, and that's something that nobody likes to talk about, but there are costs involved. And these are some of the things that that you're going to want to consider. Like I said, you'll probably want consultants, how and where and how long you advertise, that costs money. travel for the applicants. You'll want to bring them here. Many times they'll want to bring their family if they're relocating, because spouses usually want to know what the community looks like, feels like. You may or may not have receptions. You will certainly need to have hotels for them to stay in when they come for interviews, all of that kind of stuff. And again, background checks, which if you run through background checks, it typically has a cost associated. Once you've made your big decision and you know who you're going to hire, there are some things that happen on the back end after the search. The first is, and this is completely the board's responsibility, your job is to create conditions that will help that person be successful. You don't want to hire somebody and set them up for failure. I know that, because that would be detrimental to your community. The complete opposite is your responsibility, and that is making sure that when they come, you do whatever you have to do to create conditions for that person to be successful. You want to make sure that your expectations are clear right from the start. Here's how we're going to evaluate you. Here's when we're going to evaluate you. Here's what you're going to be evaluated on. Here are the top 3 goals for the first year. Boom, 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 boom. No communication problems. You talk through communication by creating protocols. The processes you use with this superintendent may be different from the processes that the person coming in would want to use with you. Or maybe the processes you use right now aren't working for you for whatever reason, and you want to kind of shift them. You sit down, you talk about protocols. If a citizen complaint is referred by a board member to the superintendent, and this board member is expecting a response in 24 hours, but the superintendent thinks they have 48 hours, and says within 48 hours they get back, every time she's going to be disappointed. She's expecting 24, this person's expecting 48, and if we don't know, we just set each other up for failure. So clarifying expectations, ensuring that you have protocols, focusing on common goals, that's how you're going to help to set the foundation for success, and really being clear right from the start, here's what your evaluation is going to be based on, so that everybody knows, including the community, what the expectations are and how the person's going to be evaluated. So that's just a general overview, which is what I was asked to provide. And now I can answer any questions that you might have.
Talk about again the where the board has them be a little more specific on when the board has not the one-on-ones, but as us 5 sitting here, we bring that person in. Is that our top 5, top 3, whatever that is? That's the top, I would assume. And that's obviously a public meeting.
Yes, sir.
Have you seen public comment questions to the superintendent? Potential superintendent?
That's a good question. Any iteration can happen if the board says it wants it to happen.
Right.
I will say that. So your first question is kind of how does it work, right? And typically the board would decide that some boards want to do face-to-face interviews with semifinalists as well as finalists. So you would have that conversation when you're talking about the timeline. What do we want? What are we going to do for semifinalists if you choose to have them? How many semifinalists is our goal? Depending on your consultant, some consultants will say, we're going to bring you the top 5, you're going to choose the top 5, whatever. Others say 3 to 5, so that number of how many you physically have to interview that day or those 2 days is going to really be based on the board's decision. That's not like a standard, something that should be imposed on you. That would be what the board decides. I will tell you, for us, when we work with school districts, we say 3 to 5 is your goal, because you may have 3 great candidates, but you may not have 5. And if you said 5, you're kind of taking time up with 2 that the board may not even want to felt that were truly qualified. So there's typically some flexibility in some of that, but the board gets to decide. Those are all decisions for the board to make. And then the question about questions for the superintendent?
Yeah, like public comment, or do you, you did mention like kind of like a town hall type thing, or if you're going to bring them in to where people can ask questions that way.
It can be structured any number of ways, and not only can it be structured any number of ways, but every district going through a search will structure it unique to what they and their community want to do. So what I have seen in some districts is a reception, kind of a soft meet and greet reception. I've seen more formal, maybe you have separate rooms in whatever building you decide to go to. And I know you mentioned a number of buildings that may or may not be useful for things like this, but you put candidate A in room 101, candidate B in room 102, candidate C in room 103, and people can go in and have a little more formal private conversation as a group, the public, one-on-one, this person just kind of answering questions to the public. The goal, we try to help boards, the goal for us to work through with boards is that you see each of the applicants in as many possible scenarios as you can, so that you can get a feel for them in a large group, in a small group, in a public meeting, in a one-on-one, right? To provide the best opportunity for you to assess each person in all of those situations.
The other question
I would say, I would caution you though, there is a risk in just having open
Right.
questions, so there's a risk
course.
involved in that.
Of course.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at like a structure, and one of your slides had it, it was like, you know, if you want like an advisory, and you kind of, and you're taking it from, you know, here's, I don't know, 8 community advisory, let's say, we all pick one. I don't know how you do it, but however you do it, you got 8, 10, whatever. Their role is, you said a couple
What the
things.
board decides it to be.
Yes, but the board's gonna decide, hey, we're obviously voting for the person. But their role could be, maybe it's asking questions that we want to be. Now, would it, you know, again, to me, you're gonna want public input. There's no question about that. We're gonna have our own public input, our own groups, our own things to get public input from. We're gonna have obviously public comment and things like that. But if we have an advisory role, it just seems to me, if we're the final ones to make the decision, we got an advisory group making up questions that we don't even want. It's this advisory group making it up. We need to ask so if none of my questions that I was asking was on that advisory group, it just seems to me, if it's us 5 up here making the decision, then it needs to be us 5 creating the questions, because what Miss Smith wants out there may not want anyone 5 here, but if she's on that advisory, and a question's asked, and it's just not something that's needed, but maybe she's got a real passion for, let's just say, you talked about this, finance, you know, and it's like, I know that's going to be, maybe that's obviously part of her questions, but, you know, in general, she loves the color blue, so she wants to paint all schools blue. I was using
Yeah.
a bunch the other day. So that it seems to me that if it's our decision here, I want to be more involved than not involved, instead of, just give me the final 5 and then let's choose. Because what if that number 6 was the right person, then we never saw number 6? And I know maybe consultants and different and things like that. I guess my question would be, you know, how does that balance work with the board? If they hire, maybe they don't hire a consultant. Maybe all 200 things come to the board. I don't know. So I guess, in your experience, I guess, and
Yeah, I will say this. With regard specifically to community advisory, everything they do, let's say it had to do, I'll give you an example, in Orange County, okay? They just hired a new superintendent a few months ago. They had a community advisory committee that developed the survey questions for the community to answer in an electronic survey format. They based those questions on the strategic plan goal areas. They came up with the questions. Before the survey is administered, those survey questions come to the board, and then the board says, you know, I'm not sure about this one, what about this one? The board has the final decision before that survey was administered. Okay. Same would be true for any other type of question, or like you talked about, maybe the community advisory committee says, here are the 5 that we think are most qualified. The board can choose those 5 and say, thank you, these are the 5 that we'd like to consider. The board could say, thank you for those 5. We actually only think 4 of them are qualified, and we're only going to talk to 4 of them. The board could say, thank you for those 5, but we actually see 7 that we'd like to interview. The board always has the final decision because you cannot delegate those tasks. So anything that you would ask your community advisory to do, you're truly asking, give us your guidance, what do you think? But that community advisory has to be very clear that they understand whatever they think and whatever they suggest may or may not be what the board does.
And even the consultant is going to say, you know, here's the 100 applicants, here's your 5 that we suggest, or
Right.
the 5 that we suggest. But we're still going to be able to get to look at those other ones.
Right.
Well, I guess it would depend on how
Just a consultant.
on the
in
consultant,
the process.
what agreement you have with them, yes.
Right.
Some will, some won't. And you'll have to work with your attorney in the example that you gave.
I'm guessing what you're trying to.
Yeah, I'm good. Go ahead, Ms. Spray.
I guess what you're actually saying is you want board involvement from start to finish in all of this. And I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what you're saying. We don't want to just have a consultant hand us 5 applicants. You know, we want to be involved from start to finish on this. If it's 100 applicants, which you're saying there's a lot of people that's not interested in doing this kind of thing for one reason or another. I think it's not just the political climate, as Mr. Tatum alluded to, but even if they just don't want to take that next step, that they're don't want to deal with all of the dynamics
And the scrutiny.
in the education system that we're seeing. You know, it's, you know, you can look at the news and look what happened at, you know, I think it was Brevard County where students, teachers walked out just here recently, from what I understood. I'm like, wow, that's really getting bad, where the point where teachers are actually walking out. So maybe that's a reason why somebody wouldn't want to apply. But with your comments, yeah, I think that we want to have a lot of involvement here, other than just getting the 5 final applicants.
Okay, to reel it back in, when we have a lot of decisions to make.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we do, and there's going to be a lot of discussions. How are we going to incorporate that into board votes on, let's say, are we doing an outside search or going inside? We need to be able to discuss that. The workshop would be a preferable setting, but we can't vote in a workshop. How do districts handle that?
Typically, what would happen would be you would schedule a workshop, which would precede a board meeting either by a day or maybe in the morning, and then you have a board meeting that afternoon, or you would have a workshop week A, and then your meeting to approve it would be week B, which is why you have to really look at that timeline, because you have to, as you're building the timeline, you have to make sure that every decision point along the way has an opportunity for board approval. So the first thing, for example, when we build a timeline, the first thing we look at is what meetings do you already have scheduled, right? And if you tell us that you want your superintendent to overlap, I don't know, say 2 weeks, and we know when she's leaving, we look at, okay, if they're gonna have to be, if you want a 2-week overlap, you need to approve the contract with the selected candidate at a board meeting before that. Plus, they need a little bit of time, right? So you kind of back it up, and then you go, okay, well, if we need to approve the contract here, we need to make the decision on who the superintendent is here to give the attorney and the board chair time to negotiate that contract. If we're gonna make the decision on who to vote on here, we have to have the interviews here, and you just have to, it's a lot of logistics.
Okay, so obviously, or it seems to me, I don't know if it's obvious to everybody else, but we need to decide, are we going to use a consultant? And then the question also becomes, if we are we going to put that out for a request for proposal? Or are we just going to pick one?
And that might be a conversation that the board needs to have to even make that decision.
Yeah. So, do you have a step-by-step decision tree that districts can use? You know, like number one, the consultant, number two, qualifications, number three.
I would say no. With districts that hire us, we do, but another consultant helping you might have a different decision tree.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? Like the qualifications piece, for example. We would recommend that you get some input from your community before you make that decision, and others may not. And so that's going to be somewhat driven by who you have counseling you.
Okay.
Ms. Messer, were you done?
Something just, sorry.
Ms. Farmer, were you done?
Yes.
I don't want to jump ahead. Okay.
Something just occurred to me that you kind of just made me think about. I had other things I was going to say. When picking a consultant, is the longevity of the superintendents a consideration? Like if one consultant company says, hey, we have an average of 6 years versus another consultant company has an average of 2 years, is that something that we can
That's
ask?
you can ask, sure, but I mean, that's something for a board to decide. You know, I've had people ask that question, and I've had others where that may not be the most important consideration, because the other piece you got to remember is, back to the political piece, elections happen, and when elections happen, sometimes superintendents change, and is that the superintendent's fault? Maybe, maybe not. So,
I get what you're saying.
yeah, it depends.
Okay, so I know that FSBA does their own searches. Are there any other, this is a silly question to ask you. Are there other consultant companies that you recommend, or you're just like,
No, I don't recommend anybody but us. But there are plenty of them out there.
that's fair.
No, but there are plenty of them out there, and there
I
are.
recall.
I'm sure they
Being
have.
approached.
But to be completely frank with you, I don't know enough about them because I don't work with them to be able to say yes, no, maybe so. I don't have enough time to vet them for you. I don't, but you may have staff who may, and you may want to call other school boards that have used other firms.
Yeah, I mean, guess what would matter to me is how successful were they? But I also think your point is fair of, you know, that doesn't,
Your definition of
longevity
success
does not
is different than
necessarily
someone
mean
else's,
success
too.
because unfortunately, I think it's tied to political wins, which it shouldn't be. So, okay, let me go back to my other list. What really hits me today is talking about how much of this is our decision, and I appreciate that. It is our decision. That's it. We have to live with it. It's on us. But something that I learned when we hired our current superintendent is how important it is that whomever is chosen, they're now your member of your team, and you stand behind them and with them. And Bob Gauze kind of said it, like, I wasn't a fan of our current superintendent when she got hired. I didn't vote for her to be hired. But she made me a believer because I got to know her. I got to work with her, and I got to see, oh, no, she's actually very transparent. She gives a lot of information. She doesn't shy away from tough questions. She's able to be decisive when she needs to be, you know what I mean? And she's good at communicating. So, you know, even if we don't all agree, this is a new person as our team, and we all have to stand behind that person and beside that person and not do things to subvert that person, because then that's not going to be successful for our district. And it would have been easy for me to do that, but I didn't. And as a result, our district has been extremely successful under her.
May I say something about that real quickly?
Yeah.
One thing I really ask board members to do as they're going through a search is to keep their mind open as broadly as they can, as long as they can. Because you will see some paper applications. Let's say you get 100 applications. You'll see one and you'll go, oh my gosh, this is the right person. This is the one. This is who we want. This is who I want. And you'll be locked in on this person. And then as you go through the process, they just took another job in Minnesota or whatever, and you go, my favorite guy, he's gone. My favorite gal, she's gone. So then you try to find a second or a third. The longer you keep your mind open to all possibilities, who you see on paper does not always match with who walks in the door. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And so not locking in on one or two people, keeping your mind open is going to help you and help your board. And I'll give you another very specific example. In some cases, there are certain candidates, for whatever reason, that some board members say, anybody but XYZ. And there may be other board members who say, XYZ is the only person I want. And then we have a standstill. If you hire XYZ under those circumstances, and somebody said, anybody but, what you described as being subversive is likely to happen. So there are times when, as a board, your own top priority becomes subjugated because of the will of the board. And so you may have a top choice, but 4 others see somebody else as the top choice. So then you go, well, clearly I don't have the votes. I mean, that's number one. The reality is on the wall. But besides that, you know, can I live with this person? Can I work with this person? It may not have been your top choice. You might be at your second choice. Or it might be that whoever your top choice is, come night of decision making, can't get 3 votes. You know, I've been in a board meeting where one board member made a motion, seconded, it was 2 to 3 failed. Oh my gosh. So now the person that this person wanted couldn't get 3 votes. So then somebody's like, okay, I'll make a motion for candidate number 2. Second, motion second, that failed 2 to 3. Okay, what do we do now? You know, so you start talking through it and figuring out. And somebody finally said, well, let's look at candidate number 3. I moved candidate number 3, second, and got 4 votes. So, okay, now we have a superintendent. But the first 2 motions failed. So in the end, it became, that's who the superintendent became, and they're very successful with that person now. But I can tell you that was a tough night.
Well, it is.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Eventually, but Mrs. Foreman can go.
Yeah, mine's real
I don't know, were
quick.
you
Are you
done?
done?
I had one more thing to say, but it's now slipped my mind after she said that, and I was like, oh, I wanted to add to that, and then now
Okay.
so if I remember, I'll.
I just wanted to expound on that. I think I remember seeing board meetings where it was split votes. They have their selection, and then they re-vote for everybody to vote for, have the opportunity to vote for that superintendent so that they feel like everybody's on board with it, and, you know,
I've seen that.
we'll back that. And I just think that's a classy thing to do, so.
I've also seen where somebody tried to do that and one person said, absolutely not, I'm not changing my vote. And then it becomes like, oh, why'd I do that?
Well, let's say we're 3-2 on a candidate, okay, so they've got the job. Then we ask for a new vote so that the 2 who voted against that candidate can change their vote to make it a 5-0.
In a demonstration of
Oh,
unity.
of continuity, gotcha, okay.
Yeah, it's important. I took a lot of heat, on a particular vote that and then I changed. But it's important that we have unity behind the superintendent. If we don't have that, the district is not going to succeed.
I got what
So,
you're saying.
Sure. Thanks for being here. Good to see you again. So if we hire a consultant, and I don't know if this is maybe even not a question for you, for Mr. Dye or somebody, do we have to put it out for a competitive bid, or can we just, like, if it sounds like these people have already invented the wheel, and if they have a good wheel.
No, it's not you mean the consultant?
Yeah, like if we want a consultant to work with us, does that have to be a competitive bid, or can we just say, these people have a wheel?
We've worked under professional services contracts.
Yeah.
So that doesn't have to, many districts don't, but some do. It goes both ways.
Yeah,
I don't know if you have policies
I have to
related.
look at, but
Yeah.
it kind of impedes your ability to hire your superintendent, which you're free to do. So I don't think it does, but I'd want to look at it.
The reason I ask is it just take more time if we have to put out a bid, and I don't know, it has to be 30 days.
Some people do, some people don't.
Yeah.
Personally, I'd like to know what the options are out there. Not to discredit you, but other organizations that does this. I know other districts don't necessarily, go through this particular consulting. So I would like to see that we actually do check into other options.
Sure,
as well.
I'm just wondering, because my second question is, like, this is obviously a big project.
Yes, sir.
And I'd actually like to see a 30-day overlap between, so that a superintendent the new one could go through a whole month, like, here's the first board meeting, before that were the meetings with all the board members and walk through a whole month. Well, now we're down to, and it's Christmas time, so I'm probably not gonna be thinking about a new superintendent during the holiday season. So January, February, March, April, May, right? So it's 5 months.
Don't forget graduations, so you work
Graduation.
around graduation
So
season.
my question is, who now is gonna be the project manager for this, to set up these timelines? And, I mean, I'm on board with you, Ms. Perry. I'm not saying that we should hire the FSBA. What I'm saying is that we need to get on it. You know, this project needs to start the first day that we have business after the new year. We've got, if we want 30 days overlap, 5 months. So if we had to put it out for a bid, well, it's a 30-day bid. We have to I don't know how long these things take. So, maybe in the first, we need a workshop. Maybe we need another workshop where we sit down and, let me ask this question first, because I'm kind of rambling. Number one is, who's going to manage this project? Who is the project manager? Timelines, figuring all those things out, keeping track of the consultants, putting out bids. Ms. Saunders?
I can add a little bit to that. Your first meeting in January is January 10th,
Okay.
okay? So, generally, the person who you have chosen to lead your charge is Mr. Choate.
Okay.
But Mr. Choate's gonna wanna hire a consultant ASAP, okay? Because he wants to hand it over to that consultant for the timeline and everything. I agree with you. I think optimum June 1st would be a good time to have somebody picked so that there is some transition, ideally, in a perfect world.
But, sorry to cut you off. We haven't even discussed that part of it.
So what I recommend is in our briefing before Christmas break,
Yeah.
we have a meeting January 10th. We need to have a board workshop before the 10th to decide, are you going to give them a contract? Are you giving somebody else a contract? Are you going out for RFQ so that you've got a decision for that January 10th meeting so y'all can move forward? Because you need to have a decision on what you're doing with consultant, non-consultant, who, what, or the process by that January 10th meeting. So we will identify what workshop date. I think we already have a calendar that has got to be on the first topic of discussion.
So looking at right now, it's the 13th is the first workshop.
Well, we're going to back one up.
So we would have to
We're either going to do it the morning of the 10th
9th or 10th.
or the 9th, because we've got to discuss this before you meet, because you don't want to wait for 2 more weeks.
Oh, I agree, 100%.
So we will set that, so you will have an action item workshop, so y'all can discuss. So on the 10th, you can vote on something.
Right.
And y'all will decide in the workshop what that something is.
Okay. So,
Because you're right, you're not gonna do it before that because everybody's on vacation.
yes.
So either the 9th or the morning of the 10th, however long you think you need. If you need more than an hour, it'll be on the 9th. But we'll set that in our briefing
Right.
so that we can communicate and we can publish that.
So now will this consultant then manage the timeline and come back to it?
They'll give you a proposal, you'll have to agree to
Right,
it.
but-
But y'all will set your non-negotiables and then they'll work within that.
and managing travel costs for.
They'll handle it all.
Do it all,
they handle-
yeah.
Okay. No, okay.
Hold on, were you done? I'm sorry.
Let's see, I have for Mr. Dye, are there any, let's say that Mrs. Smith sends me an email and says, Mr. Tatum, I really want to be the superintendent of Manatee County and I'd like to get to know you a little better. Are there any legal restrictions about me talking to any potential candidates if they contact me?
No.
No? Okay, great.
And or any consultants that would offer to meet with a board member?
Don't let them send you gifts.
No, no.
But no, you can talk to them.
There would be some cautions, though.
That's why I'm
You,
looking.
you don't want people to have a conversation with you and then walk away from that conversation with an expectation of employment. I mean, there are some cautions. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but there's some cautions you want to be aware of.
Timing wise, if we have a workshop and make a discussion and then have it on an agenda on a day after, are we violating our publishing, having the agenda published the 7 days?
What we will do, we're gonna publish on the 20th, I believe. before we leave for Christmas break, so staff doesn't come in, we will put a item already on the agenda with a broad conversation of what the intent of that is. I may not have a contract in there, but we will have whatever the general term on that published agenda, so the public knows we're workshopping this topic for the intent of this purpose, and we will vote on the outcome of the workshop of that
All right,
purpose.
thank you.
And that's how we'll have to go about it, to make sure the public has enough notice that you're voting on moving forward with a consultant on that time frame.
Real quick before I get. I
It's
know
okay. Actually, all of the things I had to say got answered by Mr. Tatum and the superintendent, and so it's
Perfect.
really fine.
So, I was already going to probably bring up in our briefing that we should do a workshop before the 10th. Obviously, the 9th is the only thing because we're closed, I believe, the week before that.
Staff is back on the 5th and the 6th.
Okay.
So we do have a little window, but we're
Because
gonna publish all these things.
The concern to me, and I guess my question would be, when you're looking at consultants, I don't know anyone else that does this.
If you haven't gotten emails yet,
Oh, well,
you
no,
will.
I have gotten a couple emails, yes,
Yes.
but I don't know them from Adam.
Right, okay.
And so
How do you vet them?
that's my point. What are we doing? So even if we have, five, a couple people that come and say we do the consulting, and we meet in our workshop, and we want a consultant. Now, who do we choose? Well, the past 2 or 3 weeks we haven't been doing that because it's break. We've never met with anyone but you. How do we? You're still not going to see anybody else. You're still not going to meet anyone else unless we do it on our own. Unless Miss Spray says, "Oh, I got a call from Anderson Consulting, and they were fantastic. They did this, they did that." We don't even have a price yet from anybody. We don't have anything like that set up. So is that something that, as chair, I can say, I'm going to go reach out to 2 or 3 others,
Sure, absolutely.
bring 3 back to the board and say, we've heard from FSBA on their kind of process, but we really haven't.
I didn't come here to get your business today.
Absolutely, I
That's
know
not
you
what
haven't,
this
and I
is
know,
about.
and I asked you. We talked about that,
Yeah.
but so that's my. So you haven't presented to us how you would present to get someone's business. So you haven't done that, and the other ones haven't done that. And then so that workshop, we've got to decide which consultant. I think it's
I can help you a little bit with that. I can have my procurement department research, and if you determine, give me 3 options, pricing, general pricing, and that they've been used in the state of Florida in the last 5 years. So at least when you come, I can give you X, Y, Z. And because in my opinion, you need to make a decision on the 10th of January per Mr. Tatum's concern.
Right. No, absolutely, I agree.
You've got plenty of time, but if you want to do a 30-day procurement process of sending it out to bid, letting people come in and do presentations, all of this, you can do that. And that will be one of the things you can talk about in your workshop. But you need to be mindful, if you do that when they hire, are they going to meet your timeline? So I'll have our purchasing department give you that. I'll have her outline what the procurement would be if you send it out for, an RFQ or RFP, what the timeline could be, what pricing, and what firms have been, in the last
So that'd
And
be
what
handful of
districts
years.
maybe they
Yes,
represented.
absolutely.
I'd like to know.
So at least you'll have something
Right.
to have a conversation.
I think on the 10th or 9th, whenever the workshop is for it, I think we've got to start from the back end, and we've got to say, okay, is 30 days what we're looking for? Okay, then check. So we've got that done. Then are we wanting to get an advisory council that's going to get together a survey to go out and ask questions? And we work down those things to then say, okay, we want a consultant. Who is it? But we haven't even talked about our own form of before we even go to the consultant what we want to see. So I think that's got to be talked about before we even go to the consultant and say, here. We can't say here because we don't even know what we want yet. Does that make sense? So I think, now I'm not saying we don't want to have some consultants lined up. I agree with you for the workshop, but I think we've got to iron out what we want and how we want it, then say, okay, here's what we want. Look at the consultants and say, okay, is that, who do we want from here? But again,
I think we're going to
Again,
need
if-
at least a 3-hour
I
workshop.
agree with you, but still, we're looking at how do you sit here? It's like saying I want to go to an estate planning attorney, and you're just giving me names and who they worked with. Well, that guy they worked with is no one like me, so I don't know. I don't know. I just don't know if it's that quick of a process to pick a consultant. Just looking at who it is, Ms. Foreman.
Collier County has already hired a consultant. They did do an RFQ. FSBA did not get it. But if, the question came to my mind that if we should choose the same consultant, it's just a search firm. If we should choose them, is that a smart move or a dumb move? Because we're going to be competing with Collier.
They're going to be on a different timeline than you, so
on a different
yeah,
timeline,
I wouldn't
but
necessarily
size.
say it would be competing. Most search firms are used to having multiple searches at the same time. So, and like I said, it's not always going to be the same type of applicant, depending on the counties that they're working with, things
Maybe
like
they'd
that.
give us a discount.
I doubt it. The work is the work.
Should this take longer than expected?
Oh, here she goes.
Willing to stay?
Well,
I mean, I know we'd have to
My-
negotiate a contract,
my-
hopefully
my
for another
job-
2 years, but I mean, if it's only for months, but
my job is to transition smoothly for a hire. So I certainly will work with the district. I'm not going to leave where you're thrown into an interim, if we can help that. But I think we got to get on the work, see what a realistic timeline is, so that you can hire somebody that all 5 board members feel comfortable with leading the district. So we know what the timeline is. We need to try to meet it. If it's going to take you a few months after that, absolutely. We'll work on that. But I think we need a workshop so that the board on the 10th, can say, here's our next action step, right, to move ahead. So whether it's deciding to go out for bid, hiring somebody on the spot, whatever, so y'all can vote on one of those outcomes on the 10th so you can get moving.
yeah, I just don't want us to make a hasty decision.
No, because you feel like you have
I
to.
don't want that,
don't either.
because
I agree with you.
I want to make sure that it's, as thought out and thorough as possible, and
Sure, I understand. I respect that. I understand.
But don't drag your feet to try to sandbag her.
I might.
No, I'm going to help Mr. Choate get the timeline going.
Yeah, I can tell there's a little bit of panic. I don't think you have to make yourselves experts before you interview consultants. I think actually the process of interviewing consultants is going to be educational to you.
Yeah.
That's going to help you start to get your arms around the issues and what are important in the hire. So I would start that process without first feeling like you need to be real experts in everything. Because what I found is I've been in your position, and a lot of times they give you a lot of information that's just helpful because they know you may not hire them. So that's just a little bit of advice to lower the blood pressure a little bit.
No, so then my question, as you brought that up, would be, is the workshop bringing in consultants first,
Yeah.
and going through that and that's what we spend that. So we're trying to line up consultants for, let's say, the 9th, to bring them in And then that first item on the 10th is we're going to pick our consultant.
Yeah.
I think that obviously there's a lot here. I mean, when do we have our next briefings? Next week? I'd like to see.
16th?
I'd like to see one, what everyone's thoughts are, and you can give this to the superintendent. And do we get the consultant first and then move forward? What?
We can't do it that way. We've got to be transparent. We can't have the superintendent polling us on these. We need to have this discussion out open. And, you know,
So
if
then we should have it now then.
we can have it now, yeah.
Before we
yeah.
wait till the next
Yeah,
time.
but
So then I
no,
guess-
no discussions.
So
with the
but we can't
superintendent.
vote on anything right now.
No, but we can,
So
but
my question is, let's talk about what Mr. Dye said. Do we want to move forward and say, let's try to line up consultants for that next workshop before the 10th meeting and do it that way? Or would you rather us get together on that workshop before the 10th and decide how we want to work backwards and the timing and that sort of thing, and then look at a consultant? So I guess that's my first question.
For me, I think all of those other pieces come once we pick a consultant, because I think they're gonna help you work through the timeline and all those other things. I mean, I think that's the impression I'm getting, so I don't really think we need to make any of those other decisions. As Mr. Dye has kind of said, like, I think we just need to pick a company. And I would want one that really understands Florida and really,
Oh, there's no question.
really understands the needs of a superintendent in Florida, because it is very different than other states. And so that would be the number one most important thing to me.
Well, and so another question would be, when we pick our consultants, and how we want that search. I know you spoke about national, everything's national. I mean, it doesn't matter. Someone in California is going to be able to find the job opening in Florida. It's obviously kind of where you advertise, if you're that advertising piece, if you're only sticking in Florida, that sort of thing. But I guess my question is, the reason why I asked this is the consultant is going to kind of tell you whatever you guys wish we'll do, sort of thing. I'm assuming, and so we've got to decide that too. Is this a search we want a national search or a state search, or to me, I think it's fluid. I mean, there is no what's a national, what's a state search. If you're in Georgia, you're gonna be able to go look at the classifieds and find openings in Florida.
Right.
So that's not a state search, that's a national search. So I think regardless, it's national. But I agree with you that I don't want to hire a learning curve. I don't want to have to hire a superintendent that's going to take a year or two to learn what the Florida standards are, what the Florida education piece is, and then our community, and then how we work. That's a whole lot of learning. So you think consultant, that should be Mondays?
If you were asking me today, I would just hire FSBA, to be quite honest with you, if you want a really honest, forward answer. Because they know all the superintendents, they are more tapped into people than I think any outside company is going to have. They have spent decades making connections with all different leadership all over Florida, and I think that they would probably have the best idea of what we need, what we are looking for, and how to find the appropriate people to fill it. And I'm not saying that because she's sitting here. I'm saying it because I really believe that, whether she was sitting here or not. That's just my belief. So I don't even personally need that consultant part. I'm willing to do it if that's what the board wishes.
Sure.
But that's not, I don't personally think we need that.
So you do believe we need a consultant, though?
Oh, yes,
I guess
but
that's-
I just don't necessarily
that's
think it
another
needs
place
to
we
be a
need-
large, grandiose thing to
I
even pick one.
respectfully,
At least talk to the competitor, their competitor.
right,
Who won, and say, oh, well, why were you better? And
right.
have two, you know, I mean, but, yeah, there is a timeline here that we need to get on, but I agree with you. The consultant, that's their job, is like, we're not experts at picking a superintendent. That's why you hire a consultant, because they're the experts at it. So you find out their credentials and
Right.
you interview them and you get a feel for their consultant, then you say, okay, we're going to go with you because you are the expert who will lead us down the trail. So, and the other point, since I have my mouth open already, is I don't know if the 9th sounds like a good date, maybe to us up here on the board, but I'm envisioning that we have a workshop on the 9th and we pick a consultant and all of a sudden a bunch of flurry work has to happen with the staff to get that ready for
Yeah.
the meeting on the 10th, and the staff is here till midnight redoing agendas, but is that true? Would it,
Make it happen.
oh, you can, but I
We'll
mean,
do it, but the meeting will need to be in the morning, because the next meeting's in the morning.
Right.
I'm
have it on
posting,
the 6th.
I'm posting the
Yeah.
agenda early, but that Friday is the 6th. So if you want to have, if our traditional workshop is on a Friday, we could have it on the
We
6th.
could do it on the 6th.
that's on, back it up a day or two, just so,
The 6th, because the 9th is the first, yeah, so if you want to do it on the 6th.
or if we have to have an out-of-cycle workshop, which I'm necessarily not a big fan of because people make plans, but this is going to be something extra on top of the normal things that we do, and
Correct.
we shouldn't hesitate to say, we're gonna have to have another workshop a little bit out of cycle, just to keep things on the timeline. So,
The 6th is good because, again, we will post all of this and have it ready before we leave for break.
But everyone agrees the consultant's needed. That's number one.
But I also want to say that we do have, I think we need to have options, not just one.
I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean,
So, Mr. Choate, I will have Ruth look at 3 to 5, whatever I can find in the last handful of years that are in the state of Florida representing or have represented districts. She can reach out to see if they're available on whichever day you pick, so that we have a few people to come in and present information to the board. But I will have on the agenda item to vote on that you will be hiring a firm. I just won't say what that firm's name is yet, but I can post that on the agenda so the public has advance notice of your intent on January 10th to hire a consultant.
So is it official then?
Or 13th, whatever day that is.
I would say let's if everyone's calendar is open, Friday the 6th.
Yes.
Yep, it's fine.
It's just that our normal time, 9 a.m.
I would say normal time, 9 a.m.
Miss Messina, you would be one of the firms I would reach out to. Are you available?
If I'm not, one of my team members would be. I have, actually, interesting, because both Brevard and Osceola are trying to find a time that week as well, so if I'm not here, one of my team members.
Okay. So FSB, okay?
So Friday the 6th at 9.
Got it.
But we can do it by teams too, right?
Yeah, if there's a
Yeah, they can
company,
present.
they can.
We can,
Yeah.
but we will ask,
Yeah.
we will ask for them to come in person. But if
Yeah, I
not,
would
we
rather
can
that.
set them up on Teams, but we'll be here.
But I like that as in Tuesday will be the voting on that consultant. I would like to then, so we have the 13th,
Another workshop.
another workshop. I would like to, I know right now we put
Yeah.
the budget review.
And what I will ask, since
know what I'm gonna say?
today you just hired the brand new CFO officially that starts January 5th. So maybe I move the budget
To the
review
27th.
to the second one
That's what I was
in
gonna say.
order to give the team just a little
And then
bit.
the 13th, we can have, I would like to have a workshop with the consultant
Correct. On expectations.
on
of-
how we move forward. Whether that's in person or Teams, that's fine. But that gives us a chance too, as board members, to have questions. We picked the consultant. Obviously, the 6th we do it. We'll have an idea probably of who we want. I know we don't vote on it until the 10th, but that gives us almost a week then to say on the 13th we pick XYZ company. Now we've had time by ourselves to say, here's kind of my thinking, here's my thinking as we're talking with the consultant.
Okay.
And I'd much rather have that done the 13th, because then voting items that may need to happen, however that is done, is now done on the 24th. And it's back-to-back Fridays that we're moving forward with that. Yeah.
It sounds like you're kind of wrapping this up. I just wanted to ask Ms. Means to hand out something that I had asked that you guys get today. It's just food for thought. When we decided to continue Mrs. Saunders' contract, school district staff had given us a graph, and the graph really illustrated a lot for me, and I really thought it'd be important for everyone else to get it. I asked them to update it, but it basically shows how important it is to have as much continuity in terms of superintendent, because you can see how our grades fluctuated, our students' performance fluctuated as the superintendents did. And it was something that really hit home for me. And while I know we're not really going to talk about it today, I wanted you guys to have it just as food for thought. It really helped me when we talked about it before. That's it. Thank you.
Can you give us an overview real quick of what we're looking at?
Yeah. So this is the one that I had requested, and when you can just see where every superintendent, this is the black line's Manatee County and the blue line's Sarasota County, but you can see that they've had less interim superintendents. And the point is that, we've had 5 permanent superintendents, 7 interim superintendents, and you can really see how the grades have fluctuated since the grading system has begun. And you can see where each superintendent falls in here and how the grades have fluctuated and how as many changes and turnover as we've had, how that impacted our school district. So I think that's just an important consideration, that whomever we pick, we want them to be here for the long haul, because we can see that that really does impact student performance. That's it.
Thank you. Anything else anyone wants to add? I think
We're
have a good plan moving forward. All right. Ms. Messina, thank you very much for coming in. We really appreciate it, and it was very helpful. And everybody else, thank you for, I know it was a good long day. So I appreciate it. Ms. Means, thank you. Everyone, thank you very much. We are adjourned.